This is the fifth week in Easter. And kind of like last week, it's a really good chance to go back and look at some of the things that Jesus said along the way, now with new eyes, the eyes of resurrection. Because when we're in the immediacy of Holy Week and in the last weeks of Lent leading up, we can't possibly look at all the different teachings and all the different gospels. And coming back through the season of Easter kind of gives us an opportunity to stop a little bit and say, okay, now I'm making connections a little more clearly, a little more honestly. It's a shame the first centuries didn't have that, or the first generations rather, didn't have that opportunity to look at them. But by the time John is writing, or whoever wrote the Gospel of John is writing, they're writing to fourth, fifth generation church. They're writing around the same time Emperor Hadrian has the wall being built between Britannia and Scotland. Germania exists. The Roman Empire is about as big as it's ever going to get. This is the kind of tension around that the writer of John is acknowledging, that there is heavy tension between those who are of the Hebrew tradition that chose to follow Jesus and those who did not. The temple was destroyed just 30 years before, so it's just one generation. A lot of people in this congregation the hearers of Gospel of John would have remembered that or would have been told about it by someone very close to them. So it's still a world of a great deal of chaos and isolation. And into the middle of that, we have what's known as the Farewell Discourse in John. It's multi-chapters. And it's basically the Maundy Thursday story that we read if we were to look at the Gospel of John. Now, when we are actually on Maundy Thursday, so many things are happening to actually get us to the arrest of Jesus that many things are kind of skimmed by. But we're right now having an opportunity to go back and look at a very narrow part of that, and that's the first 14 verses of the 14th chapter. Even those who don't attend church regularly, who have attended Christian funerals, can probably recognize this. This is not an unfamiliar passage to us. Starts off with, I'm going ahead of you. My Father's house has many mansions. There's a room for everybody. I am the way, the truth, and the light. And also, whoever asks for anything in my name, it will be granted. So these are the big three messages that are being offered in this passage. And it's hard to hear them sometimes with an ear for inclusivity because they sound very exclusive. They sound very much, especially when Jesus is talking about, I am the way. That has been interpreted for countless centuries as Christianity is the only way to have a relationship with God. And that has fueled destruction of other places of worship, of other indigenous communities who were forced into some version of Christianity that looked nothing like the first generation's experience of a living Jesus at all. In fact, the whole concept that they could be forced into a Christian faith when the writers of John didn't even have an idea of what a Christian faith would look like. That was not what they were about. So let's go back and take a look at these bit by bit, all three sections of this, because while it is beautiful, it also is challenging. And as well, we have the apostles wonderfully always stepping up and asking the questions that everybody wants to ask, showing that no matter how much you've studied or how much you've been following Christ, you still don't necessarily get it. And that's a real comfort. In fact, this entire passage is about hope, and it's beautifully crafted to tell followers that there's so much more. Whatever's going to happen, there's more. So let's start with the beginning. In my house there are many mansions. These words have been used to counsel and comfort people in loss for 2 millennia. I remember actually not long after my grandmother died, wanting to speak with her again and having a very, very vivid dream about looking for her in this huge apartment complex and knowing that this was where everybody who had died was, and I just had to find the right unit number. We have this desire to envision what heaven looks like. And Jesus gives us that. Even though Jesus never talks about what heaven actually looks like, he gives us the metaphor of a home for everybody, a place for everybody. I mean, it's so beautiful when you realize that the person you love, the person you have lost, the person you are most worried about, the person you haven't seen forever, and then you got the word that they're now gone, that there's a place for them. There's some place that they are included, that God has already pre-planned this, that there is going to definitely be a place where they are taken care of. And it's particularly comforting if these people had a really hard time in life, who did feel excluded and didn't feel that they were contributing or were valued. This concept of what comes next is a comfort. And we're talking the conversation on Maundy Thursday, of course, where what comes next for these folks is probably death, definitely for Jesus, but probably death for them. So there is a what's next desire for the folks that are in that room, wanting to know what is going to be encountered, what they're putting their lives on the line for, what Jesus is putting his life on the line for. And Jesus comforts them and gives them this hope and says, we have something else that we can all move to. And then he talks about the way and the life and the truth. Now, Jesus' I am statements all through John are meant to be a reflection back to the reference with Moses sitting around the burning bush. Moses asked to know what God's name was, and God says, I am who I am, or I will be who I will be. So that's the direct connection to the I am statements in the Gospel of John, very much paralleling Jesus and God. And this is before Trinitarian theology was even started to be worked out. So there's already a connection there between Jesus and God. If you know me, you know the Father. If you know the Father, you know me. They are one. They are connected. And he talks about the path, the way. In Proverbs and in Ezekiel and in a number of places in the Hebrew Scripture, the way, the path, is often the way of wisdom. It's not just a metaphor for the journey that we're on, or the direction we have to take, or the route correction that is needed to get us where we, on the direction, the pathway where we're supposed to go. It's also about wisdom. So not only is Jesus the way, but it's the word wisdom is also included. Jesus is the wisdom, is the truth, is the light. And this is not meaning Christianity is the truth and the way and the light. That's a big difference for us as we try to grapple with the concept that even the apostles are struggling with. How is Jesus the way? Where is he going? What are we going to find? How do we know how to follow? I mean, it's Thomas, who right up says, like, where's a map? I don't understand how I'm supposed to get here. The way Jesus lived his life is the way we're talking about. The feeding of the hungry, the care for the sick and the destitute, the housing of the homeless, the mending of the broken, healing where healing can happen. This is all the way, because it's part of a wider experience of making the world better. I was having conversations with my youngest this week, and there's been a lot of change in our lives this year. And I was trying to explain to him that my life experience is that when doors close, windows open. It's not just a trite metaphor, and it not necessarily the way I want them to open or the way I expected them to open, but looking back over my life, I can see a general process where the things I feel passionate about, the things I feel called to be about, the things that I feel compelled to do, there's been an opportunity for those things to happen and to be realized. He told me he wished he had my faith, and then he acknowledged that, well, yeah, I mean, there's people stepping up for us and doing things I didn't expect. The young take a while to kind of get used to trust, and trust is hard. But trust is what we're talking about here in Jesus saying, I am the way and the truth and the life. It is how to live Jesus' wisdom, that all are part of the family. There's not an exclusion here, even though this passage has been used exclusively for so many centuries to say there's an us and a them, there's an inside and there's an outside. And we remember, when I started this, I said we have to remember that we're listening to the words spoken from the gospel writer to a church around 100 CE. So they're already feeling a little bit under siege. They're not feeling hospitable to the they right now. They're not feeling like they have to share their message. The writer of John is impressing upon them that they know the way they're supposed to go. But second to that, that speaks to our 21st century sensibilities, is that we are not, as Christians, the exclusive owners of the way. There's a wonderful Hebrew proverb that I always go back to that says there's many ways up the mountain, but if you keep going around convincing everybody that your way is the only way, you're never going to get there. This is how we have to approach this message of Jesus. The path is there. There are incredible people who do not necessarily adhere to Christianity, the faith and the dogma and the theology, but they really like Jesus. And they really understand that message of care and reaching out and being there for each other. And they try to live that life. That is the way and the truth and the life. It is available for all of us. It is not about adherence. It's about lifestyle, which is what our faith really is when you crack right down to it. It's about following the examples that Jesus gave. Because Jesus, with God, are showing that this is the way God wants us to live. We don't have the corner on wisdom in Christianity. We also don't have the corner on good. And Jesus, being good, is telling us how we also acting good is going to make a difference. And finally, we get to the part where all you have to do is ask in my name and you shall receive. Now, that is a really hard one. Especially for people who have asked for things like healing for a loved one or a new job or something significant, and they haven't experienced that. So often the interpretation has been, well, you didn't pray hard enough, or you didn't do the right words, or your faith isn't as strong as you think it is. And that is all wrong. It is devastatingly wrong. It is cruel to tell people that when they do not get what their heart genuinely desires. It's really hard to walk this one, and there's no good way to go through it. Because our lives, our timing is not God's. And sometimes bad things are just going to happen. We just lost Rabbi Kushner not that long ago, who talked about why bad things happen to good people. Sometimes the answers are things that we're not going to be privy to. Sometimes the things that we want most fervently do not fit with the way the world is going to work or the way God expects. And I'm walking real thin here because I do not believe we're puppets to God's will, nor do I believe that we have a one defined path in our lives, and if we deviate, then somehow we're getting punished and we're pushed back on the path, or that we have no will, because that again goes exactly against all Christian belief and all Hebrew belief for that matter, and Muslim, and just about every other faith going. But there is something bigger. And in our very limited human understanding, our very limited vocabulary, we can't necessarily get it or understand it. And Jesus knows that about us. That's why he says, you will know God by knowing me. I'm here to show you the physicality of what love looks like. God, being love, has the whole world in God's hands. There are bigger patterns. There are bigger reasons. There are things that we will never understand. There will things that will make sense in 50 years that don't make sense now. But we still have to trust, and we still have to walk that path. And we still have to ask. We still have to pray. We still have to come before God, because that's the relationship we are asked to have with God. And the reassurance that we are heard. Doesn't mean God is Santa Claus. Doesn't mean we're going to get what we think we really want. But we still ask because we never know what is going to come and how it's going to come. Much like that conversation I had with my son. There are some dreams I have had for 3-4 decades that might be now coming true. Prayed about them for a very, very long time. My path of life has gone in various places. But maybe, in a way I hadn't expected, something else is happening too. God's timing isn't ours. We have very finite understanding of what a lifetime looks like. And we have it's very myopic perspective. But God is something bigger. And so as we look at this entire passage, the depth, the richness of John 14, 1-14, where Jesus is assuring us that God has us all. We are all shown how to go about living God's life. We are all accepted into God's world. No matter what happens that is horrible, there is a next step. There's a life after. There's a moving on to something else. An assurance that those who leave us are not abandoned and lost and forgotten. There's not eternal darkness. There's eternal comfort and homes. All of this is what Jesus wants to impart to his followers just before he dies. Even if they don't get it, it's still the same message that God is with us, that hope is something to hold on to. When we're struggling with hope, reach out to each other to try to find that place for it, because it is there and it is offered. And Jesus is offering us a way, a lifestyle, a wisdom, a method to be in greater relationship with God. Jesus offers us that. And we do not have to be doing anything else to make ourselves worthy. We're worthy as we start. And now our journey is to follow in the way that Jesus has asked and how Jesus has taught. And know that at the end, there is something waiting for us. It's not closure. It is more than we can imagine.